It's a great honor to be able to speak to you today with my two distinguished colleagues. When I first saw that Joel, our CCM colleague, was a member of the Troika, I didn't realize that I had a partial answer to the question that you raised, but I remember that Edna Mae Rawson, my seventh grade music teacher, told us that the Union won the Civil War because they had more inspirational music. So, it also brought to mind what I have always thought was the best book title, and that is Robert Sherrill's 1970 book, Military Justice is to Justice as Military Music is to Music. I guess we're seeing that with the Guantanamo rag. If I could add a footnote, the Morgan Institute for Human Rights a couple of years ago gave William J. Butler human rights medals to three lawyers who played pivotal roles in the defense of the Guantanamo prisoners. One of those was Yvonne Bradley, an African-American Air Force JAG lawyer. The military lawyers are the unsung heroes in this story. The military indicates that it is an obligation for the lawyers to defend their clients zealously. I believe I'm correct in saying that every military lawyer with respect to Guantanamo who has lived up to that obligation has failed to receive their next promotion, which is in the military, the end of your career. Yvonne Bradley, the person that represented the military lawyers for us, was threatened by her commanding officer that she would be jailed unless she backed off, and she refused to do so. There are many angles that one may take on war. Adam Hochschild's recent book on World War I notes the shockingly high number of deaths of soldiers, as well as a difference in composition. 19% of the sons of peers were killed, 31% of all the men graduating from Oxford in 1913, excuse me. 21,000 British soldiers were killed or wounded on July 1, 1916, the first day of the Battle of Somme. Contemporary wars have reflected a change whereby innocent civilians are the principal victims. In the Iraq War, over 112,000 civilians have been killed, and I believe that the U.S. Loss in troops is between 4,000 and 5,000. One of the lessons that was learned from the Vietnam experience was to eliminate the draft. I doubt we would still be in Iraq if the draft still existed, as the opposition to the Vietnam War was centered on college campuses. Very few children of members of Congress have been sent to fight in this war of choice. Recently, we observed the 10th anniversary of September the 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks. I recall shortly after that being in Berlin, where the street leading up to the U.S. Embassy was strewn with flowers, which ordinary German citizens had placed as a memorial. That scene was replicated all over the world. Many countries, including many that did not have traditionally sympathetic views with the United States, found that day that how much that in fact they cared for the United States. Had you told me that within 2 years that the Bush administration would be able to squander that goodwill, I would not have believed it, but in fact, with the Iraq invasion in violation of the Security Council, which was asking just for additional time for Mohammed el-Baradei and the International Atomic Energy Agency to continue their search for weapons of mass destruction, that the U.S. instead disobeyed the Security Council and invaded. One might observe that we are in a period of endless war, raising significant constitutional questions in terms of separation of powers and limitations on civil liberties. One might note that the borrowing of the term war to other settings, such as the war on poverty and the war on drugs, both of which appear to be failures. On war and law, a rather large subject for a few minutes of observation. Some of you may have seen Elaine May's interview of Woody Allen, where she asked, how would you go about achieving world peace if you had time? Woody Allen's response was, is world peace possible, or is the human race too innately aggressive? For instance, have you seen women at a sample sale? And if there really could be world peace, there would be no nations to rail against and hate. We'd be down to our spouses. No, I think universal harmony is a pipe dream, and it may be more productive to focus on more modest goals, like a ban on yodeling. Again, back to the music. I offer a few observations. We are in the midst of flux in international law. Since the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, international law was based on nation states. The individual did not have status, save through her state. A legal revolution was initiated with the UN Charter in 1945, whereby states undertook the obligation to protect and promote fundamental rights and freedoms. These rights were elaborated by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. There are copies of that for you in the back table if you would like, as well as some issues of the most recent issue of the Human Rights Quarterly. One of the most prominent to implement, since then a host of treaties and institutions have been established to implement these rights. One of the most prominent is the European Court of Human Rights, where under nationals of member states sue their countries for violating rights that are protected by the European Convention. Regularly, countries lose and they implement the International Court's decision. At no time in history have more people felt entitled to fundamental rights and freedoms. We saw this in the 1989 collapse of communism in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, and we are witnessing it again today in the Arab Spring. I might note that with the billions we spend on intelligence, no one in U.S. intelligence agencies predicted either 1989 or the Arab Spring. In a separate area of international law entitled the Humanitarian Law of Armed Conflict, we have seen develop since the 19th century rules regulating the conduct of war. In the post-World War II area, we saw important developments with the Geneva Conventions, dealing not only with the treatment of prisoners, but also limitations on permissible targets. That is, the attempt to protect innocent civilians. We also saw the Nuremberg trials. In a recent book by Rudy Teitel, she refers to a fusion of the two, labeling them humanities law. Humanities law is exerting a significant influence over today's conflicts. Because of time, I will offer observations respecting a line of cases involving the United States. The first President Bush intervened in Somalia in what was a case of humanitarian intervention. Because of a notorious incident involving the deaths of 11 or 15, I'm forgetting the exact number, of U.S. soldiers, the U.S. pulled out. Unfortunately, when Rwandan when Rwanda occurred in 1994, President Clinton prevented either the United States or the UN from intervening, and with the result that 880,000 Rwandans were slaughtered. That could have been relatively easily prevented. They were essentially slaughtered with machetes, not heavily armed troops. He felt that the U.S. would not support intervention in Somalia. When the situation in Bosnia arose, the Clinton administration moved to have the creation through the UN Security Council of the International Criminal Court for the former Yugoslavia, rather than intervening with military troops. There was a great deal of public pressure that subsequently led to NATO's intervention. I was invited to China to comment on some papers by members of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and one of the senior person was condemning the Clinton administration for intervening in Bosnia, indicating that the U.S. essentially was inclined to do this. And I challenged that observation because, in fact, it was not the government that was eager to do it, that it was basically a reaction and pressure from the American public, both with respect to human rights groups, but also from the newspaper coverages of the victims, the Muslim victims in Bosnia. We have witnessed the creation of international courts to deal with a number of post-conflict situations, such as Cambodia, Sierra Leone, East Timor. More recently, we have adopted a permanent international criminal court with more than 100 nations ratifying it. I should note again that the role with respect to the creation of the International Criminal Court that NGOs, civil society organizations, played. There was a coalition of over 1,000 human rights NGOs that pressed for the creation of the permanent court. The body of humanity law has been added to recently with the UN's adoption of the responsibility to protect principles, whereby an obligation is placed upon countries to protect their citizens' basic rights, particularly against what we might term crimes against humanity. The record is checkered. We have, as we have observed in Darfur. On the other hand, the recent UN authorization to protect the Libyan citizens from their Gaddafi's government appears to be largely successful. We have also seen the International Court involved in a number of African countries. The first case was referred to it by Uganda, where the Ugandan government sought and got the indictment of the leader of the Lord's Resistance Army, known for some of the most egregious atrocities. I will stop here because of time, but I would like to leave you with the following thought, that underpinning this legal revolution is a belief that individuals everywhere are entitled to basic human rights. The United States has an important role to play, and its challenge is to bolster the international institutions that are being created. One real brief footnote with respect to that is something that is interesting, but which most Cincinnatians don't know, is that the city of Cincinnati made a concerted effort in 1945 to have the United Nations located in Cincinnati. They sent a delegation over to London, where the site selection committee was meeting, and their basic argument was that Cincinnati should be selected because it was the most technologically advanced city in the world. To give you a sense of what made it the most advanced city, technological city in the world, was that you could reach by shortwave radio any place in the world 24 hours a day except Japan. And that was because Voice of America was located in Cincinnati. The site that the UN was offered was Eden Park.